From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in Washington, D.C. In the days since the brutal violence in Israel and Gaza, communities across this country and around the world have been drawn into conflict, grief, and uncertainty. Even before the violence started, religious-motivated hate crimes in America had spiked, reaching their highest levels since 2001. What has happened in the Middle East has contributed to a dramatic rise in antisemitism and Islamophobia here at home, proliferating on virtual platforms and in communities across the country, including attacks on an Islamic seminary in Boston, Massachusetts, a synagogue in Fresno, California, and increased incidences of bullying and harassment of Muslim and Jewish students. And this week, a 6-year-old boy was stabbed in a hate crime for being Palestinian and Muslim, and he died. I am personally heartbroken, angry, and searching for a way forward. Approaching this on our show is both challenging and necessary. This week, I'll be checking in with 3 leaders for whom I have tremendous respect. You'll hear from Celine Ibrahim, Jay Michelson, and Fred Davie. Almost certainly, you will hear things that you agree with and things that disturb you, and I encourage you to let that be okay. This will not be a debate, but rather I am doing what Interfaith Alliance is encouraging us all to do. To check in, to listen, to learn, and find ways to be with one another and insist that we will never sanction hate and that we will attempt to forge alliances across differences wherever, whenever, however possible. And now to my first guest. Rabbi Dr. Jay Michelson is a commentator on CNN and a columnist for Rolling Stone. Jay is a meditation teacher and the author of 10 books, including The Gate of Tears, Sadness, and The Spiritual Path, and is affiliated professor at Chicago Theological Seminary. Jay holds a Ph.D. in Jewish thought from Hebrew University, a J.D. from Yale Law School, and a non-denominational rabbinic ordination. Jay, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So, I just want to start with a very open question that you can take wherever you want to take it, which is, how are you feeling today?
Today is better than yesterday, but the day is young. I think many folks, American Jews, Palestinians, people from all backgrounds are in a real grief process right now. And you and I've worked with grief in our lives over the years, and it comes and goes. I think the initial shock of the news of the massacres in Israel, once the details became known, the kidnappings, the mass graves at a music festival, the killing of elderly women and children and babies, was incredibly devastating. And for progressives and people who have been working for peace in Israel-Palestine for decades, it was doubly painful because we knew what was going to come after, which has now transpired or begun to transpire. So we knew, even as we were in our raw pain and grief, that there was more pain ahead. And sure enough, of course, that's unfolded. And so it was complicated. This is my family. I only knew one person who was murdered in the attacks, and not very well, but I have many friends who were, huddling in shelters, or who had close friends and close family members, parents, children, who were murdered. And, that's my first emotional reaction. And it really could have been me. I went to a music festival at that same location many years ago, and that pain was there mixed with the concern and dread of what was to come. And then came a third wave of pain, which was, and I'll speak frankly here, what I feel was the total betrayal of Jews and the anti-Semitic devaluing of Jewish lives from some segments of the left, including the religious left. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. I've received a lot of personal statements of support, but more importantly, organizations and people who have been fighting for peace and justice in Palestine. Many have been very supportive, while recognizing, of course, that there was a next level of violence to come, which is now unfolded. However, many voices did not. And I cannot underestimate and understate the rage that I feel, the betrayal, and the hurt for people in my own community, friends of mine, colleagues, people who I've worked with in the LGBTQ movement, in the religious left, for not even pausing while the blood was still running from the bodies of the victims to justify, quote unquote, contextualize, or in some way even cheer and support these brutal attacks. I cannot think of any other example of a group of people, when a group of people is massacred in heinous, horrifying, shocking ways, that there's a quick rush to either explain or justify or contextualize that. And there are a lot of reasons for that might exist, and we can go into that if you want. But ultimately, it's been a real rude awakening as to how little Jewish lives matter to people who claim to speak for human rights of all kinds. And I want to hasten to add, this is not to minimize the deaths on the Palestinian side and the suffering of the Palestinian people. This is not to minimize the suffering of occupation for decades. And it's not to, of course, in any way justify the horrible violence that has happened, including against innocent Palestinians, even in the United States, and people who are Muslim or perceived to be Muslim in the United States. But your question was how I feel. And I and pretty much every other Jewish liberal that I know closely is in a tremendous amount of pain, confusion, and feeling betrayed.
Yeah, I think it's really important to be able to state that. I have seen that, and I have appreciated your presence in the various media formats that you show up in, and how important it is to say that so that people can hear it and be aware. So I think it's really important, especially for those of us who are committed to an interfaith future, a future where all people of all faiths and all religions are valued and respected. To be able to articulate the betrayal that you feel, I think, is really important. And hopefully people will be able to hear that and understand it. You said it, I think, very, very clearly. And I guess the next question is, like, how have you been processing this for yourself personally? I mean, one of the things I do want to highlight today is your new Substack, which sounds like, hey, he's got a new Substack. But I think part of the reason it happened now is that you had something really important to say, and you are saying it. And another reason I think it's happening is that you are putting yourself out there and relying on all of your spiritual training, your religious knowledge, your understanding of society to offer some help to people who are also trying to process this. So can you talk a little bit about the writing you've been doing and how that process has been for you?
Sure. Yeah, it's one of those unexpected coincidences, if we believe in that, that, I did launch this newsletter about a month ago. And it's in a way very similar to what State of Belief has done all these years, bringing together an understanding of religious consciousness, spiritual consciousness with progressive politics. And it's called Both And because of that. It's both the spiritual and the political. So it's familiar territory. It was never intended, obviously, that this launch would then coincide with this period. But for me, I think, dating back to, way back when you and I first met, when I was doing LGBTQ activist work as my career, it's clear that there are personal and spiritual and religious sides to these political events, debates, and controversies. And there are a lot of folks who are hurting right now. And I'm speaking from my position. I'm a rabbi. I want to be sure. And again, I'm just going to keep reemphasizing it. I don't want to minimize or marginalize or decenter the pain that Palestinians are experiencing now, and that their families and friends and anyone who is concerned about them is feeling right now. But in my position, from speaking as a rabbi, I've dealt really not that well with it. It's been a really rough 10 days. It's just this maelstrom of emotions, and it's very familiar from grief processes. When each of my parents died, you think you're okay, and then you're not, and you just get hit by a metaphorical truck when you least expect it. So I'm fortunate to have this new platform where one of the advantages of a Substack type newsletter is you can really just speak from the heart to readers who want to hear that, what you have to say, and whether they support it financially or just subscribe or whatever is almost secondary. That it's forming a kind of a community. And so, for me, the first thing I wrote, it was before a lot of the mainstream, now others, Michelle Goldberg has written beautifully on this. A lot of mainstream writers have talked about this pain that American Jews are feeling, and the shock that so few people reached out to check in and see how we were doing. This is an unprecedented event. I'm just speaking again from the Israeli side for a moment, that it's never the scale of this catastrophe and the gruesomeness of this catastrophe literally has not happened to Jews since the Holocaust. And this triggers deep wounds, deep trauma, intergenerational trauma that many people carry around. People bursting into their houses and killing their grandparents in front of them, and then posting the videos on social media, which is a very contemporary version of that old trauma. And people are really hurting. So I've tried to draw on, my work in the meditation and mindfulness fields for techniques, tools, ways to just sort of build a little bit of resilience. And, there's a real second risk in this kind of pain, which is that we harden our hearts, just like Pharaoh in Egypt, and we harden our hearts to the suffering on the other people on the side of this, on the other side of this border. And without even commenting about what policy is militarily the right one and things like that, no matter what we believe in terms of politics, I don't want to harden my heart against the suffering of others. I feel terrible when I do that. And of course, there are folks on the Jewish side who are doing that, and they're coming from pain. I'm not really here to judge that, but for myself, I want for my whole 30 years of doing this spiritual teaching thing, my dharma has been about being truthful with our emotions and allowing space for them to unfold. And when that's grief and pain, that's what I want to feel. But that hasn't been good for my health or my sleep or my my work, but it's just the way that I live.
Yeah, I really appreciated that. And I'm thinking particularly of one of your Substack articles, which really was, I'll say as a preacher, like I'm often preaching to myself when I'm preaching to others. And it felt like you were teaching to yourself as you were offering those same tools to others. So I wonder if you'd be willing to walk through briefly some of the principles that you laid out in a Substack several days ago that just felt really, really applicable to anyone in this moment and others, experiencing other tragedies, but felt very directed in this moment.
Yeah, I think thanks for seeing that. That's definitely true. This was me writing for myself a little bit and trying to practice what I preach and failing sometimes. A lot of what I put in that particular post, which was entitled "What Can Help," was actually drawn on my experience from COVID, where I was working for a meditation app and podcast called 10% Happier, and people were in acute pain at that time, and we really were trying to be of service. And so part of it is just recognizing that this pain and anxiety and fear, all of these things happen to the body. These are somatic, and it might not even be helpful to try to chase down the articulate reasons. I'm a professional articulator, so my mind wants to, disaggregate and figure things out, but that may not be helpful in this kind of pain. And so the positive side of that is that we can attend to the body in ways that we can't really attend to the mind or the heart. I am not coming to this moment with a set of policy prescriptions that will solve this problem. And I don't know. I really don't. And I feel just terrible about what the near-term future holds, certainly for Gaza, but also for the region. And so it might not be possible to address the mental, intellectual pieces of what we're thinking and feeling. But I can try to do some self-care of the body. I can try to make sure I'm not actually practicing this very well, but eating and sleeping well. And that's one tool. And secondly, just some mindfulness is an aid in cutting down on putting in inputs that make things worse. On Sunday, all I did was doom scroll. And I did it kind of consciously, honestly. This is a week ago. This was Sunday, the 8th, so the attacks happened on Saturday, but I at least didn't get all the news until sort of Sunday morning. Ironically, I was officiating a wedding Saturday night. So it's good that I didn't have all of the details. I had the news, but not the details of it. And I just felt like I wanted to go down into the abyss. And that's what I did. For a few hours. Judaism has this wonderful practice of Shiva, which is a 7-day period after somebody dies who we're close to. And you don't try to make it better. You just allow the process, allow that grief to unfold. At a certain point, it becomes skillful to, shift a little bit. And so I notice now when there's a desire to kind of rummage more in the painful, horrible news, I can just feel that, with a little bit of attention and mindfulness, and really hopefully sometimes gently not do that, regulating our news intake. I don't think anyone listening to this is in danger of being too detached from the news. Probably our listeners are people who are very personally involved in one way or another. And so, there's that old saw that religion and journalism afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. Right now, I think comforting the afflicted might mean just stepping back a little bit from the gory news, and tending to ourselves and our communities and to those who are hurting and more vulnerable than we are.
I don't need to tell you that there is a rise of anti-Semitism in this country, as well as Islamophobia, and this conflict in the Middle East is definitely exacerbating that. With terrible outcomes. And I'm just wondering, what, I'm not, I know you just gave that great thing about not going for solutions, but I am wondering, have you seen anything that you're like, oh, thank you, and that is a relief, and it gives me a glimmer of hope going forward? Have you seen any incidents like that? Anybody saying things that gives you hope, or what ways forward are you imagining, even as you stay in this place of honesty with your heart?
Well, I'll briefly say something about Israel, which is that the Israeli public is really furious at the right-wing government that allowed this to happen through their negligence. And there is a bit of I don't even want to say silver lining, but I think it is true that there is a real sense of failure from this government, which before this happened, I, like many others, was supportive of, widespread protests against this right-wing government. So right now, of course, there's a unity government in Israel. It's a war government, but that's not going to last forever. That's for this moment. And I think there is a possibility of change, that if, this government does not speak for, the large center of the Israeli public, the previous, the government before the unity government. And, there might be some hope for change on that side, which might lead to policies that might someday lead to an end to occupation and more justice. Maybe. The irony, I think, is that some of the most moving developments outside of Israel really bring Jews and Muslims in particular together, because we're both being targeted. So I there's not much one can do after that horrible, like the hate crime in Chicago against a 6-year-old boy. I signed a petition as a rabbi, and I've seen a lot of widespread outpouring of support. There's additional violence happening in Europe right now, targeting Jews, targeting Muslims. I'm not naive, but there might be some solidarity simply in these two groups being targeted. And nobody's, one thing that was another tragic irony of the initial attacks, nobody asked anybody's political views before they were, they killed them. Those people at that music festival, 200 some odd people, those tend to be left-wing folks, right, who go to those kinds of festivals. Not entirely, but, and the person who I knew who was killed was a very dedicated peace activist, really putting his time and his whole life behind those beliefs. And likewise, outside of Israel, nobody's checking to see what my political views might be before I might get targeted, or same thing if somebody's perceived Muslim or perceived to be Muslim. And where there's hope for me is in maybe that shared experience of vulnerability. But I also am aware, look, I mean, things are going to get worse in Gaza before they get better from a humanitarian point of view. And I don't want to put anything on the Muslim community or say like, hey, come and reach out to us while your people are being bombarded and being forced to leave their homes. And, I have a lot of anger toward Hamas as using human beings as human shields. But I also am mindful that it is Israel dropping those bombs and doing, engaging in that military operation. So I'm not calling for a kumbaya moment, but there are those of us who are holding fast to our beliefs in peace and in justice, while not excusing any violence on any side and not weaponizing that violence to make some political point, which I've seen happen a lot.
Yeah. I wonder if you could close with offering some of the poetry that you shared on your Substack, called Both And. I think people can find the Substack Both And. It's Jay Michelson. But you offered some poetry, I think, in your most recent edition. And I found the turning towards poetry to be helpful. And so perhaps you'd close by reading a piece.
I included one poem by a Palestinian American poet and one by an Israeli poet. I think I might do an excerpt of each one. So this first one is a poem called Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. And, it touches on themes of the pain that we feel, really feeling into that with profound compassion can be a source of how we generate kindness in ourselves. So it starts, before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. Skip down a little bit. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you have been looking for. And then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. The second poem is by the well-known Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, and it's entitled Wild Peace. Not the peace of a ceasefire, nor even the vision of the wolf and the lamb, but rather, as in the heart, when the excitement is over and you can talk only about a great weariness. A peace without the big noise of beating swords into plowshares, without words, without the thud of the heavy rubber stamp. Let it be light, floating, like lazy white foam, a little rest for the wounds. Who speaks of healing? Let it come like wildflowers, suddenly, because the field must have it. Wild peace.
Rabbi Dr. Jay Michelson is a commentator, columnist, a meditation teacher, and the author of 10 books, including The Gate of Tears, Sadness, and The Spiritual Path. Jay, thank you so much for taking time to talk about this difficult subject with us.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks for having all of these multiple voices that are going to be in this episode. I really appreciate that.
We're just getting started with this week's show. Up next, religious studies scholar Celine Ibrahim. And later, the Reverend Fred Davie of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. You are listening to The State of Belief, brought to you by Interfaith Alliance. Dr. Celine Ibrahim is a scholar of religious studies with a focus on Islamic intellectual history and applied ethics. Her books include Women and Gender in the Quran and Islam and Monotheism. Having served in counselor and chaplain positions at Harvard and Tufts, Dr. Ibrahim is on the advisory council at the Miller Center for Interreligious Leadership at Hebrew College and affiliate faculty at the Boston Islamic Seminary. Celine, welcome to the State of Belief.
Thank you so much, Paul. It's an honor to be here with you as someone who's been a longtime mentor of mine.
I just want to start by, we have history. You and I have history. Dr. Ibrahim, exalted as she is, I remember when you were at Princeton and you were part of a program I had on religion and diplomacy. We really have, over the years, stayed in touch. You went to Harvard after that, and then to Brandeis University and got a PhD there. And you have been such an important leader and voice in the interfaith movement, but also within your own tradition. And I'm just thankful for you for being here today, and wanted to reach out and just check in and start with a very essential question of how are you feeling? How is your heart? How is your spirit?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And thank you too for the mentorship. I think as a young person and knowing that I had interest in both religion and public affairs, that having spaces as a young person to be able to ask questions of experts and, to the space that you created then, it was one of both intellect and heart. And I am honored to see that you're continuing to create those spaces. So I'm managing, right? I'm keenly aware that I'm in a safe place, and many are not. And my heart goes out to all of those who have lost relatives, who have lost families, who are just in precarious situations. So I'm managing, I'm coping, I'm checking in on people, on friends and on relatives that are more directly involved.
And tell me a little bit about how you, in those check-ins, especially within the Muslim community, what is the feeling that perhaps you can share with our listeners about how Muslims in this country or around the world might be feeling, thinking, although understanding that this is not a monolith, there's much diversity there as anywhere, but the people you're talking to, what are some of the conversations that you can share?
That's an interesting thing about the Muslim community that I think you're picking up on, is that, for some people, this conflict has defined their entire existence, right? And we often hear prayers for people who are suffering in Palestine, specifically in masjids, the mosques. At the same time, for many Muslims, this is not the central conflict that has defined their life. Their life has been defined by a similarly historically situated moment, the partition of India and Pakistan, and the ongoing tensions and the nationalist movements there. And others are coming from the African continent, where they're facing civil uprisings and ethnic violence. And so for some people, I think the trauma that they carry is reactivated, whether or not they're Palestinian or Arab, just by this situation. There's a number of Syrians who are wondering when they'll ever come back to their country, or what will be left when they can. And so I think in Muslim communities, there's just a sense of deep grief and worry over the situation escalating as it seems to be. I think there's a lot of concern for the situation for the people in Gaza who, are just in such a perilous situation right now. There's anger, there's grief, there's disappointment once again that we're in a place to say Islam does not condone terrorism, and that hit that track again and again and again. So yeah, it's mixed.
Yeah. I don't feel like we can have this conversation without acknowledging the murder of a 6-year-old boy who murdered only because of an identification as Muslim, as Palestinian, by his landlord in Chicago. And, as much as everyone is speaking out against it, I mean, this has widely been condemned by the Jewish community, by everyone, it doesn't change the fact that within some hearts, too many hearts in America, this reactivates a kind of terrifying Islamophobia that results in violence on Muslim lives. And I just want to acknowledge that, to let you know that I see that, and so many of us see that. But I there's no way to appreciate how that reads to Muslims and yourself as a mother. How that reads as in this country, in Chicago, for that to happen.
I'm just, my heart is with that family and all of their relatives, and for the Muslims in the Chicagoland area and, all around the country. And one of the things that has brought American Muslims and American Jews together over the past decades is the Islamophobic violence, the anti-Semitic violence. And this is, it's a place in which I think American Muslim and Jewish communities can understand each other's pain and fear. And this type of one-off violence, it works in everyone's psyche. And I'll tell you, Paul, I didn't go to the grocery store this weekend just because I just didn't want to put myself out there one more time in public. Why I'll eat granola, and it's just that type of, the way in which an isolated act of violence then just has these repercussions. I was at home over the weekend, and I heard loud explosions, and I ran, I locked the doors, I turned off the lights, I hid. The irony is it was my neighbor's bat mitzvah, so I was totally safe. It was fireworks for my neighbor's bat mitzvah. But just that, the way in which the even one-off violence can just get in people's psyche, even if we do live in communities that are safe, or it erodes the trust. It just creates this deep unease, which I think is the intention of the violence. So unfortunately, in that way, it works.
Yeah. Up next, I'll talk more with Celine Ibrahim, and later, Vice Chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, the Reverend Fred Davie. If you miss any part of today's program, you can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com. And make sure you subscribe to the Next Generation podcast at stateofbelief.com/new podcast. That's stateofbelief.com/new podcast. You're listening to State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.
I'm Roxy Stone.
And I'm Caitlin Beatty.
Saved by the City is a podcast from two Christian women cracking the code of faith from the mean streets of New York City.
Our podcast captures what happens when purity culture meets hookup culture, when distraction steals from devotion, and when the diversity of viewpoints and lifestyles clash against assumptions.
Gotham can be a weird place for Christian women, but we're out there, and we have stories to tell.
Saved by the City, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in conversation with religious studies scholar Dr. Celine Ibrahim. What are some ways that you lean into the ethics of Islam and the knowledge that you have of Islam that is in conversation with other traditions, but, because your work is always in context, for those of you who are listening, Dr. Ibrahim, her academic work is really unparalleled in looking at women in Islam and ethics, as well as interreligious engagement. And so, what's a lesson or lessons or wisdom that you are taking from your tradition that maybe you can share with all of us so that we can grow in our wisdom? Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I mean, Islam, like every single other tradition that I've studied, really respects the human dignity. And it doesn't matter if, it doesn't matter what ethnicity a person is. It doesn't matter what religion they adhere to. There's just a baseline for human dignity and human sanctity and the sanctity of life. So I'm just, that's the place where I return. When I see somebody maimed, whether it's from an airstrike or a ground invasion or whatever it's from, I'm not asking, well, what religion was that person, to decide whether or not that grieves my heart. What I'm really sad to see is that so many people are treating conflict situations like this one as if it's some type of, like sporting match where we're cheering for a side. It's a collective human failing that we can have so many people murdered and in such precarious situations. It's not a moment to be polarized, and that's deeply painful for me. Just as from my own religious ethics, I just human life is human life. Human dignity is human dignity. It's not dependent on somebody's ethnicity or creed.
I think that's such an important insight, and thank you for sharing that. We spoke earlier about your daughter who is abroad and in a boarding school, and you mentioned that she, as a Muslim American, was in this when all of this happened, and that she had a friend who was also American, and some of what they're trying to do. Can you share that story?
Yeah, so it's my daughter, her name is Rahma, which means like merciful, compassion, and she grew up attending sort of peace camps, Muslim Jewish exchanges. She grew up in interfaith circles. Part of my family is Christian, so grew up going to decorating Christmas trees with friends and the like. I'm as a parent, I'm glad that she had those exposures. I think that they've made her life rich and meaningful. And so now when she's in a situation, she does have a Jewish American friend who's studying with her, who lost family in the attacks. And at the same time, she's Egyptian American, she's Arab. And so, she's been exposed, to the struggle of the Palestinians for, as long as she's been alive, basically, and able to comprehend politics. So I it's just a moment, and I'm both, I'm deeply saddened for, for her dear friend, but also, this is what I wanted for her, to be able to be in a position where she can, hold grief and hold anguish and kind of, still stand proud in her Muslim American identity, proud in her, Egyptian identity, her Arab identity. So yeah, it's, and I wonder, how can we teach more kids to be able to hold the center in situations like this, because it takes training, it takes practice, it takes making mistakes, it takes safe environments in which to learn that are lower stakes. And I worry that in the US, we have a system of just kind of trying to relegate difficult conversations to, out of our public spaces for young people and out of the school systems. And I just regret that might be causing more ignorance to eventually resurface at the times when we need real wisdom and real human connection.
Thank you for that. And I think you're absolutely right. It's about training. It's about being experiences with people who are different, recognizing difference, being able to articulate difference and disagreements, strong disagreements, finding ways to stay in community that are respectful and hopeful. And I just really appreciate all the ways that you have been doing that with your life and all of your students and all of the people you have influenced in that way. At this point, is there anything that you would like non-Muslims to especially hear about ways they can show up? So why don't you say what you need right now?
I appreciate all of my friends who have kind of checked in with me and, how are you doing? And I've been trying to do the same thing for, people who I know are deeply impacted by this this situation. And even as simple as it is, that little act of reaching out, it just reaffirms our common humanity. At the same time, I think if aid does start flowing into Gaza, that is one way that I think people can get directly involved. There's millions of people that have absolutely nothing to do with militant groups that just need clean drinking water, and I think this is definitely the responsibility of the international community, and not just this conflict. And I want to emphasize that as well, that this, anytime tensions flare up between Israel and Hamas, or tensions in this related to the Israel-Palestine issue, it's oftentimes that people from other conflict zones feel like, well, what about us? And so I think it's just a moment to renew our commitments to refugees and those who are in the wake of political violence, wherever they are.
Dr. Celine Ibrahim is a scholar of religious studies with a focus on Islamic intellectual history and applied ethics. Having served as counselor and chaplain positions at Harvard and Tufts, Dr. Ibrahim is on the advisory council at the Miller Center for Interreligious Leadership at Hebrew College and is affiliate faculty at the Boston Islamic Seminary. Celine, thank you so much for being part of the State of Belief this week.
Thank you, Paul. My prayers to you and your team, and to all of those who are out there, unsure of what's coming next.
The Reverend Fred Davie is Strategic Advisor at Union Seminary. He's Senior Advisor for Racial Equity at Interfaith America. He was part of the Obama White House Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, and he is Vice Chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Fred, it is so good to have you back on The State of Belief.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks for having me back.
So I want to start with the question that I think we should all start with is, how are you feeling?
Well, obviously the events of the last 10, 11 days or so are troubling to the soul, and particularly mine. I, feel deeply for the people of Israel, Palestine. I think it goes without saying that the atrocities of Hamas must and should be condemned without qualification. And while at the same time holding space and room for the tragedy that's befalling all the innocent people of the region, Jews and Palestinians alike. And I'm particularly, deeply saddened by what has happened to the people of Israel. But I'm also deeply saddened about the situation of the people in Gaza. So my soul is troubled, deeply troubled by the events of that region and other parts of the world.
You've been witness to good moments and terrible moments in this country. How do you, as a Christian pastor, understand the role of the Christian church in what we're seeing as the rising both anti-Semitism and terrible anti-Muslim violence that is happening in this country? What role can we play as Christians in this rising animosity in this country?
Right. I think, sort of as a first sort of confession is good for the soul. So I think the Christian church in America, first of all, should be clear and honest about its own complicity in both anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. Own that, but not stop there. And perhaps find it a special obligation then to create paths of peace and cooperation, particularly here in America, which is probably one of the most diverse religious democracies in the world. And then past that confession, celebrate what we do here, and yet also be challenged by what we have to do going forward to help to rectify the places that we continue to fall short, to uplift examples of where religious diversity and cooperation are really working and happening, and then to challenge ourselves to look for new vistas, particularly in this troubled time, to be a beacon to the world about what is really possible. So I think, as a Christian, as someone who's worked in local congregations, who's on the board of the Interfaith Center of New York, who's worked with Interfaith America, who knows the beauty and the richness of religious diversity in this country and around the world, I think, we can, in humility, because of our own complicity in things that we should not be proud of, but in humility, call attention to the things that we can be proud of and be that beacon of hope and light that's so much really at the essence of at least the Christian message, and I think the message of other religions around the world and in this country as well.
You have been, I'm sure, at tables over the last 2 weeks or so where there have been extremely difficult conversations and people having very different interpretations of what is happening, how to process what is happening, what the correct response should be. What are almost spiritual practices or disciplines that you maybe can offer those of us who are trying to figure out how to be present in conversations where people are saying things that we disagree with, but still maintain community with them? I'm just curious how you react in those moments, and what spiritual wisdom do you bring to those kind of conversations that perhaps our listeners could learn from?
I think what I have been inspired by are those people who encourage us to look at the humanity in all of this in the first instance, that no one on either side of this conflict, no matter how hideous the things they may have done, or just by virtue of who they are, is not without a divine spark, or not without fundamental humanity. Or to say it more positively, everyone on both sides of this conflict is human. Now, that does not mean that we don't have to restrain and condemn really bad human behavior, but it's human behavior, and that these are human beings that are being killed and maimed and tortured, and who suffer. And in my tradition, human beings made in the image of God, full stop. I think that when we are encouraged by various people around the country to focus on being compassionate, we should hear that and heed that in this situation. I think looking again for ways to cooperate across faith, ethnic, class, national boundaries and lines, it's also a good approach to this. So I try to incorporate those practices in how I respond to this enormous tragedy and other tragedies around the world, and other sort of difficulties and conflicts. Imago Dei, image of God, human beings made in the image of God, compassion growing out of that, and then looking for ways to cooperate and create community. Those are the things that tend to guide me here, particularly, as I said, when my soul is troubled.
Thank you so much for that. There is a senator who shall not be named who said that we are now in a religious war. And I found that deeply troubling, because I don't know how you see, as you said, the image of God in everyone if you begin to use rhetoric such as religious war, which is, by definition, over the thousands of years is kind of a zero-sum game. How do you respond to that kind of rhetoric?
By saying that it is completely unhelpful and it's unbecoming of a U.S. senator or any leader, or perhaps any person anywhere. Israel has declared war on Hamas. And I would pray that if there is a war, and there is one underway, that it would be strategic and limited. I heard someone say that sometimes war is a necessary evil. It is sometimes necessary. It is always evil. And I tend to resonate with that. So in this case, Israel feels as if it needs to wipe out the leadership of Hamas. That's if a war with a limited objective. It's not a religious war. And I don't think it helps for anyone to label this struggle as such. I would encourage, as the president has and others, that Israel, in its execution of its efforts to eliminate Hamas, or the leadership of Hamas, would be very, very strategic about how it proceeds. Already, a lot of innocent people have lost their lives, have been maimed, and are suffering. And I think it behooves everybody in this case, if we can't stop that right now, which I wish we could, to work overtime to limit the amount of innocent suffering that happens in this and other situations. So it's not a religious war. It shouldn't be labeled as such. It's irresponsible for leaders to call it that. And I think if it must be executed, then it should be done in a very, very limited and strategic way, and that we should have a ceasefire to all of this as soon as possible and work on a constructive approach. I'm a believer in a two-state solution for the situation there, so that the Palestinians and the Israelis can have a state or have states that have safe and secure borders, but allow people to flourish and be the people God has created them to be.
Yeah, I think the part of the distress of the religious war is not only how it's being, perceived over there, but how this can seep into the American politic, and we have seen how that has already, that people are already, taking sides, and that violence and death has come from this terrible moment we're in. What are some glimmers of hope that you have seen over, this in recent days? Conversations that you've also been a part of. In your role at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, you are obviously in contact with so many different religious leaders across the world, as well as in this country. Are there any conversations that give you hope, and what kind of contours do those conversations have?
Right. So I am very appreciative of the leadership that Rabbi Rick Jacobs, of the president of the Union for Reform Judaism, is providing in this time. We probably don't agree on everything, but I think there's not a more compassionate and caring person when it comes to these things in America, if not the world. I traveled with him and a group to Israel last August 2022, I guess it would have been. We actually were there when there were missiles launched from Gaza, and then Israel responded. And I think he's providing good leadership in this time. Rabbi Joshua Stanton, Reverend Jackie Lewis, and a leader in Islam were on and have been on the airways, particularly on MSNBC this past Sunday morning, but in other venues as well. I think they are showing what it means to cooperate across religious lines, to offer examples of how to cooperate and be supportive of one another in this time, while feeling deeply and passionately about the issues that this conflict generates. The chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, I, as vice chair of that commission, along with Imam Mohammed Majid, we put out a statement encouraging the cessation of religious incitement by governments around the world, particularly by governments and non-government entities in the Middle East. So I think there are examples out there of leadership, of cooperation across faith lines that can serve as sort of a light unto our paths, if you will, as we continue, our journey in this time to find a peaceful situation to this very tragic circumstance in in Israel, Palestine, Gaza. And I think we can continue to look to those leaders to provide direction and guidance for us as we work our way through what is really a horrific situation for that region of the world and the world as a whole at this moment.
The Reverend Fred Davie is Vice Chair of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and Senior Advisor for Racial Equity at Interfaith America, as well as Senior Advisor at Union Seminary. Fred, thank you so much for taking time to be back with us today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you for you and the Interfaith Alliance for the kind of light that you are shining on this situation and your efforts to provide moral clarity and a beacon on how we might get ourselves beyond this to a more peaceful and joyous place. So thank you.
I want to take a moment to speak to you, the listener, who has heard these voices, and I encourage you to consider what you've heard. Take any wisdom from each one of the three who offered a way for us to be in this moment and also to reach out to others in this moment and to take seriously each of our responsibilities to be agents of wisdom, of courage, and of peace. Interfaith Alliance is committed to this moment and to each of you. If you come to our website, interfaithalliance.org, you will find resources on combating Islamophobia, combating hate, as well as combating antisemitism. We encourage you to reach out, let us know how we can help you to do work in your community, to forge interfaith alliances, and to build a better future for everyone. And that's all the time we have for the State of Belief this week. Please be sure to subscribe to the new and improved podcast called The State of Belief at Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast platform, or at stateofbelief.com/new podcast. Subscribe to The State of Belief today. We need your help keeping the State of Belief going. I hope you'll consider being a partner in this crucial work by making a financial contribution today. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. And if you're getting something out of this show, share it with your friends and family. Let's get more people listening and keep these conversations going when the show is over. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at State of Belief and share State of Belief with the people in your networks. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. You'll hear highlights of the Interfaith Alliance Capitol Hill Banned Book Briefing from earlier this month, featuring Congressman Jamie Raskin, Tracy D. Hall, former Executive Director of the American Library Association, Anisha Singh of the Sikh Coalition, and Cameron Samuels from Students Engaged in Advancing Texas. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.